Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your bank is closed, your savings are gone, your job has disappeared, and millions of other Americans are facing the same nightmare. In 1929, the richest economy on Earth suddenly collapsed. Within just a few years, 25% of the entire country was unemployed. This was the beginning of the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in modern history. But the real mystery is this: how did the most powerful economy in the world fall apart so quickly? Chapter 1. The Illusion of Wealth. To understand the crash, we need to travel back to the Roaring '20s. The United States was booming. Factories were producing more goods than ever before. Cities were expanding rapidly. New inventions like automobiles, radios, refrigerators, and electric appliances were transforming everyday life. Henry Ford's assembly lines allowed cars to be produced faster and cheaper. Millions of Americans were buying vehicles for the first time. Electricity was spreading across the country. Jazz music filled dance halls. The economy seemed unstoppable, and the stock market reflected that optimism. Throughout the 1920s, stock prices climbed higher and higher. Newspapers constantly reported rising profits and record market gains. For many Americans, investing in stocks began to feel like a guaranteed path to wealth. People from every profession began entering the market: teachers, farmers, factory workers, office clerks, barbers. Everyone wanted a piece of the booming economy, but beneath the surface, something extremely dangerous was happening. Chapter 2. The Dangerous Bubble. Many investors weren't buying stocks with their own money. They were borrowing it. This practice was called buying on margin. Instead of paying the full price of a stock, investors could purchase shares by putting down only 10% of the cost. The remaining 90% was borrowed from brokers or banks. As long as stock prices kept rising, this system looked brilliant. For example, if someone bought $1,000 worth of stock with only $100 of their own money and the price doubled, they could sell the stock, repay the loan, and walk away with huge profits. This created a powerful cycle. More people borrowed money to buy stocks. Demand increased. Stock prices rose even faster. But the entire system depended on one fragile assumption: stock prices would never fall. And when millions of people believe prices can only go up, markets stop reflecting reality. By the late 1920s, stock prices had climbed far beyond the actual value of companies. The market had become a massive speculative bubble, and like every bubble in history, it was about to burst. Chapter 3. The Crash. In October 1929, the first cracks appeared. Investors began noticing signs that the economy might be slowing. Some large investors quietly started selling their stocks. That alone created nervousness. Then panic spread across Wall Street. On October 24, 1929, investors suddenly rushed to sell their shares. Millions of stocks flooded the market at once. This day became known as Black Thursday. Prices fell sharply, but major banks stepped in and bought large amounts of stock to calm the market. For a moment, it looked like the panic might pass, but it didn't. 5 days later, on October 29, 1929, disaster struck. That day became known as Black Tuesday. More than 16 million shares were dumped onto the market. Stock prices collapsed. Fortunes disappeared overnight. Investors who had borrowed money suddenly faced margin calls, demands to repay their loans immediately. Many couldn't. They were ruined. But the stock market crash was only the beginning. The real crisis was still unfolding. Chapter 4. The Banking Collapse. After the crash, fear spread throughout the entire financial system. Americans had lost faith in banks. People began rushing to withdraw their savings. This created something called a bank run. But banks did not actually keep all the money customers deposited. Instead, they loaned much of it to businesses and investors. When thousands of customers demanded their money at the same time, banks simply didn't have enough cash. One bank after another began collapsing. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 9,000 banks failed across the United States. When a bank closed, customers lost everything. There was no deposit insurance, no federal protection. If your bank failed, your life savings vanished instantly. For millions of Americans, the financial system they trusted had completely collapsed. Chapter 5. Mass Unemployment. As banks failed, businesses began collapsing too. Companies could no longer borrow money. Consumers stopped spending. Factories slowed production. Then they shut down entirely. Millions of workers were laid off. By 1933, unemployment had reached 25%. That meant 1 out of every 4 workers in the country had no job. Families who once lived comfortable middle-class lives suddenly faced desperate choices. Many could no longer pay rent or mortgages. Evictions became common. Thousands of homeless Americans built makeshift communities of shacks and tents. These settlements became known as Hoovervilles, named after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the crisis. Across the country, long bread lines formed outside soup kitchens. People waited for hours just to receive a bowl of soup or a piece of bread. For many Americans, survival became the only priority. Chapter 6. The Dust Bowl. As if the economic collapse wasn't devastating enough, another disaster struck. In the Great Plains, years of aggressive farming had weakened the soil. Farmers had removed large areas of natural grass that once held the land together. Then a severe drought began in the early 1930s. Without moisture, the soil turned into dust. Strong winds swept across the plains, lifting enormous clouds of dirt into the air. Massive dust storms darkened the sky. Entire towns were buried in drifting soil. This environmental catastrophe became known as the Dust Bowl. Hundreds of thousands of farmers lost their land. Crops failed. Livestock died. Families packed their belongings into old cars and trucks and headed west toward California. They hoped to find work in agriculture, but jobs were scarce. Many migrants lived in extreme poverty, struggling to survive in unfamiliar places. Chapter 7. A Nation in Crisis. By the early 1930s, the United States faced an economic catastrophe unlike anything in its history. Banks had failed, businesses had collapsed, millions were unemployed, faith in the financial system was shattered. Across the world, economic crises often lead to political instability. Countries facing depression and unemployment sometimes turn toward radical solutions. The United States stood at a critical crossroads. Americans demanded action, and they soon elected a leader who promised dramatic change. Chapter 8. The New Deal. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt became President of the United States. His plan to combat the Great Depression became known as the New Deal. Roosevelt believed the federal government needed to take a much larger role in stabilizing the economy. His administration introduced sweeping programs designed to restore confidence and create jobs. The government launched massive public works projects. Millions of unemployed Americans were hired to build roads, bridges, dams, parks, and schools. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration put people back to work. The government also introduced new financial protections. One of the most important changes was the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. For the first time, bank deposits were insured by the government. This helped restore public trust in the banking system. Another major reform was the creation of Social Security, providing financial support for elderly Americans. The New Deal did not end the Great Depression immediately, but it helped stabilize the economy and rebuild public confidence. The Great Depression remains one of the most powerful economic lessons in history. It showed how fragile financial systems can be, how dangerous speculation can become, and how quickly prosperity can disappear when confidence collapses. In just a few years, the richest economy in the world had fallen into the deepest economic crisis it had ever known. And history has shown something again and again. Economic collapses rarely unfold slowly. They often arrive suddenly, quietly at first, and then all at once. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most dramatic economic events in history, like and subscribe for more stories about the moments that shape the world we live in today.